And I thought this might be a great time for some of you, not all of you, but some of you to meet a good friend of mine. Georgia Schaefer, who's with me on this Facebook Live, I have known since, I was trying to think about this, Georgia. I met Georgia before I wrote any books. So this is almost 20 years that I've known Georgia. I decided that, I didn't decide, God decided that he wanted me to speak and write. And I thought, oh my gosh, I have no idea how to do this. And so I signed up for a class called Christian Leaders and Speakers Seminars or something like that. And so I attended this class, and Georgia was one of my group leaders. And so we hit it off instantly. And she lived in my neck of the woods about an hour and a half away. And we have been friends ever since. But more than friends, we're colleagues. And Georgia's a licensed psychologist. She's a coach. And she's done a lot of work with rebuilding your life after loss, especially divorce. And we're both in the divorce care videos. And so we've just journeyed our career path together, as well as speaking and writing. She's written a number of books. And I thought it would be really helpful to bring her on for some of you this time of year who are going through a divorce or have been divorced, and you feel like you're living in Groundhog Day. You're just not getting forward. You're doing the same things over and over again, and your life isn't changing. And you're saying, oh my gosh, I just can't face another year like this. I can't face another decade like this. I need some change. I need some solutions. How do I rebuild my shattered life? I didn't choose this story. I didn't choose to have my marriage end, or maybe you did choose to have your marriage end for very good reasons, but you're still stuck in anger or hurt or fear or overwhelm. And so I invited Georgia to come and share a little bit of her story, and also to give you 5 steps that you can take in this new year that will help you specifically rebuild your life after a divorce. So welcome, Georgia. I'm so glad you're here. I just want everybody to remember, this is my this is my public Facebook page. So if you're typing in a question on the Enriching Relationships That Matter Most page, it is public. People, if they go to my page, can see your comments. So just be mindful of that as you interact with us. But welcome, Georgia. And I'm so glad you're here. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. It's good to see you. And tell us a little bit about your story.
Well, I found myself years ago facing a major health crisis, was given a 2% chance to be alive. And as a result, I went through a divorce and lost my job. And I was a licensed psychologist, but it didn't take me too long to realize, yeah, we teach people how to grieve, and I'll talk about that in the first step, but we still haven't rebuilt our lives. And I had no idea what that looked like. I had no idea what skills I needed because I never learned them. And so that was the process. It was like feeling my way in the dark. As I moved down that path of rebuilding. And I've learned so many things and worked with so many women. And there's some things, if we know ahead of time, we can move through it, not at a breakneck speed, because it is a process, but we can understand what that process looks like.
You know, so just share how long you've been divorced, because I think that had some credibility to your story.
Yes, I have to think, like, I thought we knew each other for 25 years, and I think I was divorced when we met.
Yeah.
So it's about 28 years that I've been divorced. If God would have said to me at that time, you will be single for 28 years, I probably would have died, because it would have been nothing I would have chosen.
Yeah, and I just want to encourage you women that are in this position. I mean, you look at Georgia, she's gorgeous at 25 years later than I met her, but when I met her, she was gorgeous. She's a psychologist, she's an accomplished woman. It's not the answer to just quickly remarry. And part of rebuilding your life is having a life if you don't remarry. And Georgia's had the most amazing life. Last year, she went to Paris. This year, she's going to Italy with her girlfriends. And she has rebuilt a life. She's not sitting waiting for marriage to rebuild her life or a man to rebuild her life. She's taken ownership of her life and rebuilt it. And I can't think of anyone more qualified to help you rebuild yours than hers. So I'm going to have her go through some of these steps. There's 5 of them that she uses in a class she teaches. on rebuilding her life. So she's going to kind of give us a little the cliff notes here this morning here on our Facebook Live. And so, what's the first step? I mean, here you are, broken, and everything's lost. What do you do?
Oh, yes. The first step is make the choice, choose to grieve. And I mean, be willing to face all the painful emotions that come with a divorce. It means finding a healthy way to express, like you talked about, the anger, the sadness, the resentment, the guilt, the shame, feelings of rejection. Those are intense feelings. And we don't want to numb that pain. We don't want to ignore it.
Yes, we do. We do. We sort of do.
Well, that's true.
We sort of do. That's why we eat, drink, and do bad things while we're going through divorce, because we sort of do want to numb those feelings. So let's just be real with everybody.
Well, I mean, to be long-term healthy, that's not the choice we want to make. But you're right. I hated that. It was awful. And so many times I want to squirm my way out of it. But having gone through that, I can say, you got to be short-term miserable to be long-term healthy. And here's the deal. After a divorce, you're not only grieving the loss of your marriage, you have all these other losses. Maybe you lose your home, your lifestyle, your health insurance, lose time with your children, lose, your job, lose friends. You'd be surprised how many people distance or disappear in your life. So you not only have the broken marriage to grieve, but all these other losses that just add to the pain that you're experiencing. So you want to acknowledge these emotions. Like you said, you do want to skip them. I get that.
So how do you feel those feelings without getting overwhelmed? Because I think a lot of women that I talk to and Conquer, and the women that I work with who are in this mess of a marriage and they're not sure what they're going to do, feel so scared of being overwhelmed by sadness or overwhelmed by anger that they might do something crazy or something that they would be ashamed of, or they don't want to go there. So they avoid and they deny and they, do what we do.
Yeah, I get that. I honestly thought the sadness was going to destroy me, because you think it's going to kill you. It's an inconsolable pain at times. And I thought my anger was going to destroy somebody else. So how do you handle these? Well, first of all, you only deal with them a little bit at a time. You can't process them all, because then we become overwhelmed. Like I have a bottle of soda here. And if I shake it up, it's all this pressure inside. And we have all these emotions. Well, we can't deal with them all at once. If I'd open this bottle, it'd explode. So I could have cracked the lid and leave a little pressure off. So that's what we have to do. We have to deal with it a little bit at a time. And yes, it takes longer than we think. Grief lasts longer than anybody talks about. And we think we're crazy because it's taking us so long. But one of the reasons is because we can only handle the little pain in small doses. And the other thing is, along that way, to help you keep on keeping on, you got to purposely do things that bring you a sense of hope. Maybe you don't experience joy, but what gives you a sense of relief? What distracts you? I remember maybe going out for lunch with a friend and coming in the house and just feeling that pain come back in. But if I didn't do that, if I didn't have these little reminders of hope along the way, it would have been so much harder.
So you're saying pace yourself. You can't handle it all at once. Don't deny it or run away from it, but you might need a break from it from time to time. And so choose a healthy break versus an unhealthy break, like doing something that would make you feel bad in the morning.
Computer, keeping yourself so busy that you don't have any time to think or reflect, all those ways.
I think that one of the things that you said at the beginning is that, you didn't learn how. And it's amazing that we can be in an adult body and still be emotionally immature. And so I think part of these hardships that God allows in our lives can be used by Him to grow us up and teach us how to live hard in a mature, healthy way versus live hard in an angry, self-pitying kind of way. And everybody goes through that angry self-pity stage. Yeah. We all do. I've had my share of it. But how do we do hard? And sometimes it's still even hard as a grown up with little you know, we've had rotten weather here in Phoenix over the last week. It's raining, cold. I'm like, I didn't sign up for this. I came here for warm and sunshine. I'm getting a little cranky here.
Yeah. And, excuse me, as you were talking, it made me think of something else. I said this pain is inconsolable at times, and we want a painkiller. And honestly, there sometimes isn't a painkiller, but here's what I learned. When you go to God with that, you can experience his comfort in the midst of the pain. You learn how needy you are, and you learn to experience his presence in a way you never did before. And so that helped me deal with a lot of the pain that I thought was going to kill me.
Yeah. Yeah. When you're desperate, God is becomes much more real, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So then what would be the next step? So let's say, and I don't know that they're sequential. They don't just you don't be done grieving and then start the next step. You kind of work them all together, right?
Yeah, you're so right. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, there is an overlapping, because as you grieve, I'm going to talk about the next step. And sometimes something else comes up and you got to go back and grieve that, but you're still moving on. So there is definitely an overlap, but it shows you the process. And so when you grieve, you cleaned out the debris, you cleaned out the potentially toxic emotions to a degree, can't get them all. But the next step is now you want to start, because you've reached some level of acceptance, hopefully when you grieve. You want to reframe your circumstances. You want to see your situation differently. Now, here's the deal. When nothing changes about your circumstances, I didn't want to look at my situation differently. I wanted my circumstances to change. I wanted God to take the pain away, the craziness of life to stop. But instead, it had to be an internal search. I had to look at my situation differently. And that's hard. Sometimes you need people to help you. When I was going through a difficult time, my counselor said to me, Georgia, you need to shift how you look at this situation from the small picture of all the deceit you had thrown at you, the lies, the betrayal. You have to shift from that small picture of focusing on that to the big picture of how God's present in your life, how he loves you, and how he will bring something good out of this. That's not easy to do, that shift.
Yeah. I've got a great illustration for that. I'm going to run and get it for a minute, but talk about, how to reframe, like how can you, so the picture I'm looking at is my life is over. I'm divorced. I'll never get married again. I can't work for change. I can't support myself. How would someone reframe that picture? And I'm going to be right back because I'm going to get an illustration.
Okay. Well, you helped me, Leslie, at one point. I felt rejected and unlovable. And you said, Georgia, just because somebody chooses not to love you doesn't mean you're unlovable. And that was a big shift for me, because suddenly I realized I knew Jesus loved me. I sang that song as a child, but I didn't feel lovable. I talked about friends distance themselves or disappear from our lives. So reframing that is simply looking at it. Maybe their lack of kindness is they just simply don't understand what you're going through. They have no understanding of what it's like to be divorced. Or maybe your situation is so painful, they avoid it and you because they don't want to deal with the pain. Or like after the loss of my health, job, and marriage, and my finances, you talk about dwindling. But that's when I got to see all the things God provided for me. So the questions you want to ask yourself, in the second step, reframe your circumstances. You want to focus on the problems and the pain and the past, but start focusing on the present. What do you still have? Ask yourself the question, not what can't you do, but what can you do? And what do you not know about your situation? Because you look at the future and you're terrified, but not what you don't know so much as what do you know right here and now. So give me your story, your illustration.
Well, this is an illustration. So sometimes when we're looking at our life story, it's like a tapestry and it just makes no sense. It just looks messy. Like it just looks all garbled and we can't understand what's really going on. But God is making a picture that does make sense in his book. And so as we trust that the picture is coming into fruition, and this big dark blob in the middle that's called divorce actually becomes a part of the picture that's beautiful in our life. And so, but when it's at this stage, if all we saw was that,
Yeah.
and we couldn't make sense of it. So understand that we can't see everything. And part of taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ is trusting that there is a picture coming out. As long as we do our work, the picture will be beautiful because God is behind that picture, weaving the threads together in the way that need to be. We just need to cooperate with the process.
Absolutely. So instead of focusing on what you can't do, don't have, or don't see, focus on paying attention to God's hand in your life. How is he working behind the scenes for your good? And that takes us to the third step of rebuilding, is you want to transform your pain. Because when you've grieved, when you started looking at your situation differently, you're already on the way to becoming a different person, a better person. And you want to stop and celebrate along the way because you're not finished rebuilding. There's 5 steps. And so how have you grown in inner strength? How have you become a better person? How have you learned to trust more of God more and walk in faith? Because we don't always know what the future holds. So what does that look like? How have you become more caring and compassionate of other people who are going through tough times, whether it be a divorce or having financial difficulty? In Isaiah, God says, see, I'm doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Don't you perceive it? So in the process of transforming our lives, we want to pay attention. What is that new thing that God's doing in our lives? And the phrase I want you to remember is, as it turns out. In the book of Ruth, the story, now these are widows, but they're single again. And they had no way of providing for themselves in ancient times. And so they had gone back to Bethlehem, hoping the future would be brighter, but they still had no food. So Ruth, the daughter-in-law of Naomi, went out to the fields. It was the time of the barley harvest. I like to speak when I learn how, getting all tongue-tied. And she went behind the harvesters to glean the wheat. And here's what scripture says in the book of Ruth, chapter 2, the NIV version. As it turns out, she went to the field belonging to Boaz. Now, if I skip through this story, as it turns out, Boaz was a relative of Naomi's husband. He was what they call a willing kinsman redeemer. He and Ruth got married and they had a son, Obed, who became the grandfather of King David. Watch for the as it turns out, those spontaneous things, the way God is creating that quilt, that picture, that beautiful picture that maybe now you only see little hints of, but pay attention to them. Because after a while, you create this expectancy. What is God doing? And you don't want to lose it. So instead of focusing on all that overwhelming stress, focus on how God's transforming you to become something better.
It's interesting. I have a friend who started working out this last year, and she moans and groans about all the pain, at the gym and stuff. And then she posted a picture of herself in a sleeveless at the top at Christmas time. I'm thinking, oh my word, look at her little muscles there. She really looks good. And so that's what you're talking about is, when God says in James, consider it all joy whenever you face trials, because you're getting some muscles. Start admiring your muscles. Start look at the transformation here. Look at the pain I went through, but look at what's happening here.
Exactly. And because you know what that does, that empowers you. When she probably looks at that before and after picture of herself, that has to be encouraging. That has to inspire her to move up to the next level.
And to keep exercising. Yeah, keep doing it.
Yeah. And that's why this is only the third step, because we have 2 more steps. And so it's really important you pay attention, because this is going to empower you for the next step I'm talking about, which is risk making changes. We know loss brings pain, but so does new growth. Like you said, your friend, she's growing stronger. And when you're hammered down by life, when you deal with a divorce, it is challenging to put yourself back out there because there's so many things you tried to change to make better and you simply couldn't. And you know you're not in control. And so now all of a sudden you got to step out and build a new life. Well, you don't want to take a risk. You don't want to put yourself out there. You don't want to face your fears. So in this step, you have to understand the role of learned helplessness. Martin Seligman coined this term, learned helplessness. He's at the University of Pennsylvania, and he defines it as a giving up reaction, that quitting response, that no matter what you do, it doesn't matter. You might find yourself saying, why bother rebuilding? It doesn't matter. And during the time in my life when I was at that point, a friend of mine heard Dr. Seligman speak, and he went up to him afterwards and he told him about me struggling because I was stuck. And he said, she used to be this go-get-it kind of person, and now she doesn't even try. And Dr. Seligman said to my friend, life taught her she is helpless, but now she needs to unlearn it. And that's what happens to so many of us. After my loss of my health, job, and marriage, I had in many ways learned to be helpless, not on purpose, but just through life circumstances. And there's many ways God can, you can unlearn it, like Dr. Seligman said. For me, it was a garden. I planted a seed. I couldn't control how much rain, how much sunlight. But you know what? A lot of times beautiful things happened. Yeah, sometimes the seed sprouted and then a deer would trample on it or a rabbit would eat it. So I had to keep putting myself out there. And it was taking a risk. It was facing fears. And for you and I years ago, we both started writing a book. And that was one of my things to rebuild. I wanted to write a book on rebuild because I understood how hard it is. But I had never written a book. I never wanted to write a book. It took me 10 years from the time I started A Gift of Morning Glories until I held the printed copy. I can't tell you how many times I wanted to give up. And
yeah,
so
do you remember us sitting on your front stoop at your house? We were like, oh, are we really going to do this? Because God called me to write a book and called you to write a book. And so we said, all right, let's just share our chapters back and forth and hold each other accountable, remember? But that's part of rebuilding new friendships, rebuilding girlfriends that you can trust and who partner with you on your goals.
And we didn't know what we were doing. Do we know the publishing world? We didn't know anybody in the publishing world. Talk about facing our fears, taking a risk. We could have fell flat in our face.
But I think the fact that we did it together, and this is the beauty of the groups that we have, like I have Conquer, you're, working on rebuilding a group coaching. And I think that, I just went hiking this week with a friend and two friends, and we hiked Camelback Mountain, and I would have never done that alone. I would have never taken that risk. I would have gone up to, I would have seen that rock climb and said, I'm too old for this and I don't want to die. But having those two sisters next to me, encouraging, and they didn't do my work. I had to do my own climb, but they did do something. And I think having that community can be so important in this stage of taking these risks, because you're so afraid, watching other women hop over the pebbles or climb the mountain or take the new job or go back to school. Like when we, you talk to a publisher, I could talk to a publisher. We encourage each other through those risks.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what ReBUILD, my group coaching is. It's a group of a community of women, first of all, who get where you are. They're after a divorce or being separated, and they encourage you and support you, because you're right. That's critical, because otherwise you want to give up. You don't want to keep on keeping on. So you may not have that certification yet, that college degree, the job that can support you. But just because it hasn't happened, that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. You've got to keep on keeping on. And yes, you'll make mistakes, but you keep taking that next step. And if you do that, we're now at the 5th step, the last step of rebuild. And I can tell you, this is what really gives meaning and purpose to your pain, which is share your hope. You learn so many things, so many experiences. You want to share your story, your experiences, your heart with other people who are struggling, your compassion. You understand, your listening ears, listen to their pain and what they're struggling. Encourage them that they too can move past this. And I know I felt so broken, so hopeless. And now one of the things I'm passionate about is helping people rebuild, that in spite of all those devastating losses, that they can start anew and make a positive difference in the world.
Yeah, and I think that's so encouraging. And I hope all of you who are listening really get that there is light at the end of the tunnel. And when you're in a dark room and you can't find the doorknob to get out, sometimes we need a guide, a flashlight, and other people that are walking with us. I know, like I said, I would have never gone up and down that mountain without other people showing me. I was following Leanne in front of me. Where's her foot going? I'm putting my foot there too, because those are the things that help you. And so if you're in that situation, I hope that you've gained some valuable blueprint, roadmap on the steps that you need to take. Georgia's starting a new class. She's done this before, but she's starting a new class January what? 7th. So if this resonates with you, that you want to start the new year learning how to rebuild your life after divorce, or even if you're separated heading to divorce and you know that's going to be your next step, you might want to consider checking out her course. I think there's information in the feed below, Martha. I'm assuming that it's there like it usually is, that you can click and just read more about Georgia and read more about her class if you're interested. But what I want to do right now is take some questions for Georgia, because I'm sure many of you have a ton of them and we want to give you some time to ask them. Remember, this is my public Facebook page, so if you're asking a question and it's real personal about something, you might want to say, my friend has this problem or something, a way to disguise yourself that way if you feel uncomfortable. But we want to answer your questions. But I would just encourage you, you just learned 5 steps. And informational learning is not the same as transformational learning. So you've got the map, but you still may need, like I could look at Camelback Mountain, I could have had a map. I didn't do it until I had 2 other girlfriends with me who walked it with me. And I would never do that hike by myself. It's just too hard, too risky, too scary. But together, I could do it. And so I would just encourage you to really consider, what do you need this new year for you to rebuild your life, for you to grow, for you to become more than just a divorcee, more than just a broken, shattered person who doesn't know what you're doing with your life. Don't stay in that spot way too long. Some women I know have stayed there for years in anger and resentment and sorrow and fear. Yes, you're going to feel all that. You are in the pit, but you can learn to hike out of that pit one step at a time. And Georgia's, I can't think of a better guide to help you hike out of that pit of this place than Georgia. And many of you have asked me, Leslie, why don't you do something for divorce? Why don't you do something for the post-divorce? I work with women in emotionally destructive marriages, and I have all I can do. And so when Georgia said she was doing that, I said, hey, go for it, girl, because she's well qualified and well experienced to take you on that next step. And so if you need that help, check out her link below. Just click on the link and you'll find more information about it. But let's go to questions, and let me get them right now because I see we have a bunch of them. Okay, the first question is, Georgia, they want to know how your class would be different than divorce care. They already took divorce care. It was great, but, or they were thinking about going to divorce care and they were thinking about going there. Is this class different than divorce care? Because divorce care is free and it's got that support. You and I are in divorce care. We are part of the teaching in divorce care. So how is your class different?
I would say a couple things. First of all, it's a small, intimate group. You meet with me. I also offer with the group coaching, individual counseling. So you got that personalized connection. You got that community of other women. It's only women. It's only women who have gone through divorce. For me, divorce care, as you said, we're part of it. It's wonderful. And a lot of times that deals with that emergency kind of where we go to the hospital, we're bleeding, we're not functioning. And I think divorce care helps you get to the point of where you're stable. And a lot of people go through it several times, which is great, but you still haven't rebuilt your life. Yes, you've moved through your divorce. Yes, you processed a lot of those emotions. But are you at a place where you're living purposely with meaning, that you're facing all your fears? And I would say those are the key distinctions.
Yeah, so it's a little deeper, a little further on the journey. So yeah, the emergency room picture of divorce care is a great picture because it really helps stop the bleeding and give you that support right now in the crisis. But it's sort of like if you were in a car accident and you lost your legs, all right, the emergency room is going to help you, bandage you up and make sure you live. And now you got to learn how to live your life without legs. And that's the next step.
Yeah, and that's not easy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All right. You talked about grieving differently. Can you talk more about that? Because I'm really struggling with grief.
Yeah, we do grieve differently. So I wrote a lot in a journal. Some people grieve with people. And so we grieve according to our personality. Some people like to be around lots of people. Other people like to withdraw, sort things out. Some personalities like to take control, whatever they control. If it's only what they eat, they want to do that. And then some personalities let things just, it'll all work out. But you do want to cooperate with the grief, however you approach it. Like my personality, I like organization. You know what helped me grieve? Organizing a closet, organizing a drawer. Some of the other personalities would go, you got to be kidding. But that helped me sleep better at night. That helped me as I was cleaning things out and getting rid of what didn't belong. It helped me clean out things in my mind.
So I think what you're saying is we need to honor and pay attention to what we need to do to feel better in a constructive way. Because so feeling better can be had through cocaine as well, but you wouldn't feel good about yourself the next day. So all of us have coping strategies for life and grief and stress and overwhelm and all those kind of things. And if you have unhealthy or dysfunctional coping strategies like sleeping all day or taking drugs or drinking too much or overeating or just withdrawing and checking out and getting depressed, those aren't the healthiest coping strategies. They may work, like Georgia said, in the short run to feel better, but they don't cause long-term growth. They cause actually more problems long-term. So be careful of the coping strategies. We all need them. So in this class, Georgia's going to teach you new coping strategies and also helping you to get to know yourself. I think that's one of the things that women have neglected in their personal development is they're so focused on helping and giving and serving and loving others that they haven't really done their own work at getting to know who God's made them to be and how do you function and thrive in the person and the body and soul and spirit that God's given you.
Yeah. How many of you know what your strengths are? I mean, you are clear. You haven't lost sight of what you're good at, who God created you to be. And we do all different kinds of ways of making that clear, what your strengths are, owning that. And at the end of the last rebuild, I had everybody in the group write one encouraging comment about another person. That was unbelievable. The kind but different things that were said to each person. One had this bright, perky way of cheering people up. Someone else had this wisdom. She could tell, all the scattered information and distill it down into a succinct statement. So do you understand who God created you to be? Because many times we didn't know before we were married. I know I didn't. I started dating when I was 14 and then I married that man 5 years later. So I never knew who I was.
All right, got a bunch of questions here, so let me keep going. Let's see. I seem to be moving further down the path, but with the holidays and moving out of my home, I seem to move back into deep grief. Do you have any tips on how to deal with those repeated drops back into grief?
Yes. And the very thing you don't want to tell yourself, I see this all the time, do not tell yourself nothing has changed because you said you have moved further down the path. But when we have these days where everything seems to crash and we feel so helpless again, and we think we're right back where we started, many times it's just something triggered us or we got out of our routine. But that doesn't mean you aren't working and rebuilding. So realize that happens. It happens to all of us. And pick yourself up and continue to go on. But don't tell yourself that means you're stuck and you'll never move on.
Yeah, an illustration that I use that goes along with that is we sort of see ourselves here, and then growth is like, okay, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. And if I end up back down here, what's wrong with me? I didn't make any progress. And that's not how growth works. And I'm going to draw a different picture of growth. So growth really looks like this. So you start here and you get to here, and then you, oops, I had a bad day. And how do I pick myself up is part of the growth that you got here. All right. So you pick yourself up, and then you move on and you get here, and then you, whoops, I failed. I took a risk. I didn't do something right. I didn't handle myself well. Something happened. I fell apart. And all the things you learned here, you're going to use to help pick yourself up. And then you didn't get all the way back, but you fell down again and you made some mistakes, and you're learning from those and you're getting back. Here you are. You're not here. You never go back to here, right? And so understand that growth is a series of cycles, of loops. And, you never stop growing. What I teach in my core classes, I've been doing core strength for years and years and years. I still have to do it because I get out of core. And the only difference now is I recognize it, and I know how to get back into it faster than I did when I was back at 10 years ago. So it's not that you never fall into sin, or you never fall into immaturity, or you never fall into old habits. Like I just I haven't had sugar and flour in 2 years. And my sister sent me this big tub of Garrett's popcorn from Chicago. If you've ever had that, it's the most delicious popcorn that you would ever have in your life. It's caramel corn mixed with cheese corn, and just that sour or that sweet and tart together. I ate half the tub. Like I have been crabby and miserable for 2 days because I ate and gained 2 pounds. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I can't do that. I just can't do that. But yeah. I did it. I fell down. I know what I did. I got back up. I have on my list, no sugar, no flour, so that I can remind myself that I can't handle that. My body doesn't do well with that. And it not only affects my body, it affects my emotions.
Yeah, and it's the same way with rebuild. Yes, I rebuilt my life, but when I came across another huge loss, I had to grieve again. I had to start looking at my situation differently. So rebuilding isn't once and done, but the huge thing is after divorce to get you unstuck.
And get those tools in place so that you can handle life better. Yeah. Whatever the losses are, because your life is going to be full of losses. The older you get, the more losses you have, whether it's, your health, your looks, your career, your mobility, there's lots of losses. Your spouse,
Learn the strategies now.
Yeah. All right, let's see. I feel like I'm losing all my friends. What would a healthy single lifestyle look like?
Boy, I struggled with that. I honestly, after my divorce, first of all, I had no friends that were single. All my friends before I was, when I was married. So they were all married too. And it's not that I lost all of them, because I didn't, but I had not one single friend, none. And worse yet, I didn't know what a healthy Christian looked like in today's culture. Well, luckily for me, we had an excellent singles group at our church. And that started me connecting with other singles, and then your circle builds. And today I have a lot of close friends. That's who's going to Italy. There's 5 of us single women, and together, we're doing this wonderful trip at an unbelievable price because we share a house or apartment with 5 people, the cost. But yes, you have to build that relationships. You have to understand, do you know what a healthy Christian single looks like in today's culture? And it does not mean you go out and find that man, the next man who's going to marry you, because you can create a lot more problems and be back at the beginning. So what does that look like?
Yeah, we talk a lot about that in Conquer as well, as what does a healthy relationship look like? And even if you're married, for those of you who are watching this, for maybe your mother, other people in your life, or maybe you're not sure you're going to stay married and so you want to see what you had to say, as you get older, now I live in a retirement community. I'm not all that old, but I'm certainly old enough to be in a retirement community. But I have really been conscious over the last 5 years that sooner or later, probably, I hope I'm not divorced, but I'm going to be a widow, or he's going to be a widower. And it's really important to develop friends that are same-sex friends, that you have a life, that you're not feeling so anxious about being lonely and alone, that you jump into another relationship just so you don't have to experience that. Develop those good friendships, whether you're married or you're divorced or wherever you are. Develop good friendships with other people so that you can have that connection. God calls us to relationship, and that's so important.
Oh, it's critical. It's absolutely critical.
Yeah. All right, let's see. Is there any scripture, Georgia, that you can recommend to focus prayer on to detach and disconnect my bond to my spouse? I've been praying into this for 5.5 years. We've had a legal separation as I focused on grieving, healing, processing, doing my work, and conquer and moving forward. But he's still in my head. I'm not dating or even thinking about it.
Well, one of the scriptures that comes to my mind right away is Proverbs 3:5-7, the Message translation, which says, trust God from the bottom of your heart. Don't try to figure out everything on your own. Listen to God's voice in everything you do, everywhere you go. He's the one that will keep you on track. Don't assume you know it all. So you might not have figured out how to replace your ex in your life, but God will bring something. What can you put in your life that when you live with a sense of purpose or serving others gives you a sense, you have less and less time to dwell on the past. So trust God. Just ask him, God, may your voice be louder than all the other voices in my head that I'm always thinking about what my ex said or did. And it's a big trust issue. And
I think the other thing that you can do is this. So what I would say is that sometimes when we're obsessed in our mind, we have obsessive thoughts about what's he doing or what's he thinking, or does he still love me? Or I wonder if he's, thinking about me or whatever. I'm not sure what this attachment is, but it's sort of like an addiction. And one of the things that's really important in addiction, because if you've been addicted to alcohol, you have this toxic relationship with alcohol. If you're addicted to cocaine, you have a toxic relationship with a drug. If you're addicted to another person, you have a toxic relationship with this person. and you go through withdrawal when you end that addiction, and there's this withdrawal. And so during this withdrawal, but even after the physical withdrawal is over with, people who I've talked to, like I have a former client who is an alcoholic, and he'll say to me, he goes, every day I have to remember what my life looked like when I was friends with alcohol. Because if I don't tell myself that, my fantasy about how wonderful alcohol is will take over and blind me to the destruction that it caused in my life. So there's a place for remembering, but I'm wondering if you're just remembering half the story. Like you're only remembering the good parts. You're only remembering his good qualities, and every person has good qualities. So I think part of the discipline of you is to remember the whole story. I mean, you didn't separate for no good reason. So you have to bring back, like somebody who's remembering, I had a great time on my cocaine high, and maybe they did, but they also spent $1,000 that they didn't have, and now they can't pay their rent. They've got to remember the negative consequences. They've got to remember the downside, because that's what helps us say, this is not good for me. Because yeah, pleasure feels good. Pleasure does feel good, whether it's pleasure in a relationship with the love bombing and all that kind of stuff, or pleasure from a drug, or pleasure from something else, spending too much money. I can have a great time on the internet buying all kinds of stuff on QVC or wherever I want to buy them. It's when the credit card bill comes that's the warning bell that the pleasure didn't bring happiness. It brought pleasure, but it brought regret. And when your behaviors or your fantasies or your relationships bring pleasure and then couple it with regret, you've got to remember that down cycle, or you're just going to live in this, oh, this was wonderful, and forget the bad part. And we tend to do that. I mean, even having babies, right? We forget the bad part so we can have another baby. And that's a good thing in some ways. But when you're in a toxic relationship, whether it's with a substance or with a person, you've got to recall the toxic part, because otherwise you will get blinded by the good part.
Yeah, and that's why a lot of times it helps to journal when you are aware of the bad part, because you capture the emotions of that time, and when you look back, you can see, oh my, yeah, here's the real picture. The other thing people have trouble letting go of is they want that apology. They want somebody to admit how they hurt them. And so that again is that letting go kind of process that you might never hear how they treated you and that they're sorry. And can you move on in spite of that?
Yeah, and I think there's power when we talk about empowering. I think there's power in a good way of saying, of course, that would be nice to have. An apology would be wonderful, but I don't have to have it in order to rebuild my life. In
Yes.
fact, if I have to have it, I might be waiting the rest of my life because I may never get it. So if I have to have his apology, if I have to have him get it, if I have to know whether he really did love me or didn't love me at the beginning of our marriage, if I have to know all those things for me to be whole, then my wholeness is dependent on a human being and not on God. And that's not how God wants you to be and not how he wired us to be. Part of maturity is not needing, with a capital N, something from someone in order for you to be okay. Doesn't mean we don't need people, but you don't need, with a capital N, something from someone in order for you to be okay.
Yeah, you don't hold it with tight fists.
Yeah.
You open it up, your
Yeah.
hand.
All right. One of the most difficult parts of this journey for me was my former husband's betrayal. It shattered my trust in myself. I am so stuck in my head. What are some small steps in learning to trust myself again? I think this is a really important question. And you went through this recently in a relationship that you trusted someone and they turned out to be someone who wasn't who you thought they were. So it does cause you not only to break trust with the person, but like, where was I? How come I didn't see this? How come I didn't notice this? What was going on with me? So I think it's a great question for you to answer.
Yeah. Yeah. None of us likes to play the role of the fool. None of us likes to be betrayed. And I learned that betrayal is really cut steep. Uh, and again, you don't get over it overnight. And I did. I kept thinking, what didn't I see? What was I blind to? Now, my friends around me didn't see it either. I invited you into my life.
I didn't see it.
So that helped a little, but still, it's amazing how you feel shame. You're the one that's been betrayed, but you feel all this shame. And some people think, well, why didn't you see that? Surely you could have seen that. Oh, but some people are very good. And you got to realize that so you have to work through the shame of it. As my one friend said, why do you feel ashamed? He's the one that should be feeling ashamed. But again, that hurts deeply. And there's a forgiveness of yourself. Of you can't see everything. We're blind to total reality, and we can pray. And I certainly did. And I just got to believe God shut the door when He wanted to shut the door to that.
Right. And so I think that's looking at that picture again of saying, maybe there was lessons for me to learn and all of that too. And instead of saying, how do I trust myself? Here's where I think we need to recognize our humanness, that we can't trust ourselves perfectly to know everything ahead of time, because that's not who we are. We're not God. We don't have omniscience. And so we do our due diligence. We do the best we know how. Maybe we're still going to make a mistake. And then again, maybe this relationship wasn't a mistake. Maybe this relationship was meant to be how it was. And he could have changed. And he could have woken up, or he could have, or you could have done something different in terms of how you're learning about relationships through all this. So God has sometimes Judas relationships in our life at times. God sometimes has toxic people in our life sometimes, and we don't recognize them at first. And that's part of our learning, to recognize and wake up and have boundaries. How would you learn to have boundaries if you didn't have people who you needed to set boundaries with? And so this is part of our maturity, is that we have irregular and difficult people in our lives. And sometimes they look like wonderful people in our life. And sometimes they have wonderful qualities, right? I don't want to say everybody's a fraud. Sometimes there's some really wonderful qualities to someone, but they have some real immaturity to them, or real dark sides as well, that they're blind to. And because they're blind to it, we're blind to it too.
Yeah. And I think what added to my pain of the betrayal was I had written a book, how not to date a loser. I talked about recognizing that. I talked about not, dating somebody for a year and get married, to learn to know them in all situations. So we had gone through 2 years together, but one of the things I learned, you can do things right. You can invite people to see what they see and listen to what they say and seek wise counsel, but that doesn't mean you're not going to be hurt.
And I think going back to your situation too, Georgia, I mean, I think there were checks in your spirit about marrying him. That's why you postponed it and postponed it. It wasn't the thing you thought, but there was some checks and you paid
Yeah.
attention to those. And so you didn't marry the person, which was a good thing, but there were checks about some weaknesses in his life that you didn't think you could live with. And you didn't know the big one, but you knew enough of the little ones that you were a little concerned.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so you trusted yourself in paying attention and not rushing into a marriage where it would have been tempting to rush.
Yeah, and rebuilding that trust in your own sanity, so to speak, because you think you're nuts in the end, is a little bit at a time, building your confidence.
Yeah, yeah. All right. I have not filed yet, but I'm planning to. Would rebuild class be a good fit at this stage?
Yeah, yes, it depends. If you know that's the direction you're heading, it helps to understand the big picture. We talked about the 5 and the strategies along the way. And so to already be connected with a community of women who are going through a divorce or who are divorced, to already see those healthy things. I find it's very helpful. And yes,
Right. Like following behind in the mountain steps and seeing where they put their feet, right? Yeah.
You learn a lot.
Yeah. Okay. We have 2 more questions. The grief of my marriage ending is hard enough, but the issues with my kids who are not supporting me like I thought they would are crippling. Do you have any tips on how to deal with that?
Oh, this is a tough one, and I hear it all the time. But yeah, first of all, your children are grieving in their own way. And I know at one point my son was very angry at me. He was just furious. And I remember talking to his counselor in school, and she said, it seems they take it out against the mom for some reason. But his fury was unbelievable. And now fast forward, he and his father are very good friends. We have a healthy relationship, but there's these seasons. And so sometimes they're grieving in their own way and handling it. They're struggling with the reality. My son once said years later, like you said, I've been single for 28 years. It was about 20 years. He said, Mom, I think part of us always wants our parents to get back together. And I think that's true, and understanding that and giving your children some distance, but also letting them know you're there, you love them, and just be present in your life to the degree you can.
Yeah. And I think just trying to be the kind of friend to them or parent to them that you wished you had when you're going through horrible grief and you wished you had someone who just bore with some of your craziness and upsetness and emotional intensity. And you want to bear with that with your kids too, with good boundaries. I mean, you're not going to let them hit you or threaten you and those kind of things. But I think to be able to say, I know this is a shock to you. And I think part of what I talk about in Conquer with women is that when you've been the too good mother, or you've been the overfunctioner and you've placated and pretended to keep your family together at all costs, when you start to wake up and say, I'm not going to do that anymore, your kids are going to blame you for shattering their perfect life, their perfect illusion of a life that wasn't real, but you were so busy holding it all together that they will blame you for not holding it together anymore versus their dad who was hacking it with the hammer all along, right? And so if you could hold it together for this long, why can't you keep holding it together, Mom? And you're an easier person to blame than to look at that because maybe they never even saw it.
Well, and you're also modeling in that process. When you're not holding it together, you're modeling to them, which is a life skill they need. You talk about loss, that they need to learn how to grieve and what does healthy grief look like, and understanding you can only deal with the pain. So in a lot of ways, you're modeling for that, if not directly sharing with that what that looks like. And in spite of all the things they say, a lot of times they do remember what they've seen as far as modeling. when it
Mhm.
comes to grieving and working through that.
Yeah, and I think time, give it time,
Yeah.
because your kids need some time to adjust to their new normal, just like you need time to adjust to yours.
Oh, absolutely.
Georgia, last question. How do you rebuild when your narcissistic ex-husband is constantly working to tear you down through co-parenting with the young kids?
Oh, that's a tough one because you want to co-parent, but sometimes it's just impossible. So you just make boundaries, as you talk about all the time. You set the boundaries and you control what you can control. There's just some things you're going to have to let go of. You're going to have to forgive over and over. And sometimes women say, why do I have to forgive? He just keeps doing it again. And he does. And it makes it hard. And it's not what you would choose for your children. But I've seen over and over children, maybe not short term, but long term, understand what was the healthier way. And in the end, they model that.
Yeah, and I think that's really important that you need to have I think all of us, I was just talking to a young mom recently, and, one of her children is giving her grief. And I said, parenting is the long game. Maybe she's giving you grief now at 7, but maybe at 17, she's going to be through all that. You
Yeah.
don't know that. You don't know that. And so I think sometimes we start creating negative stories in our head about how it's always going to be. And I think if anything I learned on that mountain is I don't know how it's going to be always, but I know how it is right now. And this right now is enough work of its own to stay focused and stay present and do my work on getting myself up this mountain one step at a time, to think about, oh, if I have to do this for 5, I did it for 5 hours. If I knew that ahead of time, I would have said, I can't do it. So again, God doesn't always give us the big picture. And oftentimes the picture turns out very differently than we thought it would. If we just stay, like, I didn't think I would make it to the top. I did make it to the top, but I didn't think about those things. I just thought about the next step, the next step, the next step. And so I think this is a really good metaphor of these steps of saying, all I can control is my work, my attitude, my grief, my coping mechanisms, my rebuilding my life. And as my children see me walking through that in a good way and having empathy and compassion for their journey, you can't walk their journey of being in a broken home. They have to walk their journey. And I think this is a really hard thing for us as moms to accept, that we can't do their work. Even as a youngster, they have to do their own multiplication tables. We can't do that for them. If we don't let them learn it, we're going to actually cripple them. If we don't let them do their own work of learning to read and write, and we try to do it for them, they might pass their test or get through the grade, but they're going to be deficient in their abilities. And so they have their own work to do, both academically as well as psychologically, spiritually, and emotionally. We can help them, but they have to do their own work, as you have to do your own work. And I think as they watch you model your own work, that will show them something bigger picture.
Yeah, and so often I hear women say, but this isn't the perfect situation. A divorce, parents living apart. This is not perfect. Well, not much of life is. And the point of it is, I remember at one point saying to my son, I'm so sorry that your father and I couldn't make it work. I know it was hard for you. And he said to me, and this was years later, Mom, this has made me who I am. So many of my friends have parents who are divorced. Some of their fathers don't even speak to them. I this has made me who I am, to understand and help others. So he could see how that, even though it wasn't perfect, how God could use it.
Mm-hmm. And I think we have to let go of our fantasy of perfect. There
Yeah.
is nowhere in the Bible that says, and if you trust Jesus, you will have a perfect life. If you punch all your cards, you have your devotions every day, you pray for the right husband, that you're going to marry a husband who doesn't act like a jerk at some point. There is no guarantees in life that your life is going to be smooth sailing if you read your Bible every day. In fact, Jesus tells us, in this world, you will have trouble. Life is not perfect. It's full of sin. And how we handle that, how we walk through that, how we trust God in that, how we grow stronger because of that, that's our work to do. And so if, again, this is a season in your life where you specifically could use some help rebuilding your life after divorce, then I would highly encourage you to check out Georgia's course. It starts in a week, in next year, in the new year. And this might be your year, 2020, your decade, this whole year of the 20s, to really do something different. to become the woman that God called you to be, transforming your life from the ashes to the beauty that God created you to be. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Doesn't mean it's going to be perfect. Doesn't mean your life will ever be perfect. No one's life is ever perfect, but it can be meaningful. It can be rich. It can be whole. And when you hit a roadblock or you fall down, you'll know what to do to pull yourself back up. And that's the part of maturity. It's not that we don't ever fall down. It's that we know how to get back up in a good way. Anything else you'd like to share as we close, Georgia?
Well, I was just thinking as you were talking right now, your future might look dark and things aren't looking brighter, but it is taking that step. And the space is limited. So don't wait till January 6th to sign up.
Yeah, how many people are you taking in the class?
25.
Okay, so 25. And how many spots are left?
I'm not sure the latest figure.
Okay. Yeah. So there's only 25 spots available. So it really is a limited class, and you already have some. I know you had some filled. So we thought we would just open this up for anybody else in Facebook land and in my audience who certainly may be going through this situation. Not all of you are, but some of you may, or you might know someone who is. And I would encourage you to check Georgia's resources out, go to her website, georgiaschaefer.com, and just check out a lot of her free resources, get to know her a little bit, and I think you won't be disappointed. Everybody who I know who has taken her class has been deeply, deeply thankful and helped.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you for this opportunity to share.
You're so welcome, and so glad you're all here, and thanks so much for giving us an hour of your day, and I'll let you go. Take care, and God bless. Bye-bye.